Around 1981, I was a kid in rural Montgomery County, Indiana. It was a perfectly clear day, and I was playing in the front lawn of my neighbor's house with my brother, Pat. My dad was an Indiana State Trooper at the time. I think that's relevant because we had spent plenty of time around helicopters by that stage in our lives. I knew that these things could hover in place, made a lot of noise and wind, and I knew what they should look like. My brother and I both looked up. Over the left side of the roof of my neighbor's house, we saw two silver saucers. They were slowly rotating. We were perhaps 300 feet away. That's like what, 100 meters give or take? One was slightly higher than the other, maybe overlapping just a tad. We watched them for a few minutes, just sitting there. This was a perfectly clear sunny day. After some time, they both accelerated to a ridiculous speed toward the east. We ran inside and told my parents. Honestly, it was so insane that if my brother hadn't been there, and if my parents didn't recall us freaking out over these, I'd probably try and write it off as a dream. I've told my UFO story many times, but there's another part of it. I prefer to think this was a dream, but while I can no longer deny the existence of UFOs, this is a bit more sketchy. I was around 3 or 4, which is where most people stop listening, but my memories from that time in my life are so extremely vivid. Much of it feels like it happened a week ago. I got to bed one night, my security blanket at my side. Much like my iPhone these days, I wouldn't be caught anywhere without that blankie. It's a tad white trashy, but it had a cigarette burn on the edge of it, which for some reason I liked. I had a dream that night that was pretty vivid. I was in a large dark room. I don't recall being able to see the ceiling. I was walking along a walkway that had a railing, and along the sides and all over this room were holes in the floor. I recall convincing myself that things must live down in there, although I never did see anything. In front of me, and to the right, was a bright area with beings of some sort who were interested in me. I have absolutely no recollection of what they looked like. While walking toward that light, I dropped my blankie down in one of those holes on the left-hand side. Yeah, as you guessed it, that bit is going to be key later on. I recall feeling humiliated as these beings examined me. Yep, even the usual things that we heard about during the so-called child abductions, which I don't entirely want to spell out. I don't remember it being a very good time. I woke up the next morning, and my blanket was gone. I don't care who you are, you aren't going to forget that at any stage in your life. We looked everywhere for it. I had a history of sleepwalking, and our home was kind of small, maybe 1,500 square feet or so. I remember my parents looking everywhere for that blanket. It was just gone. It was a yellow blanket, and of course I needed a replacement. The replacement was blue, and my mom had to replace her signature cigarette burn. I'm a very skeptical person, and I really prefer to think that this was a dream. But the physical loss of a blanket, and the actual UFO sighting my brother and I experienced around that time, I don't recall if it was before or after, makes things really hard not to tie together. It's the weirdest thing that has happened to me, and I'm alright with you not believing any of it. I toyed with the idea of a hypnosis, and may do. One night, I was coming home from work at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I live on a peninsula, so the road I was traveling down serves as the main throughout my area. As I am nearing the side street where I live, I approached a Baptist church. Immediately, I could tell there was something odd about the church, because the parking lot was dark when usually it was lit up. Instead, all I could see at first was a singular blinking red light, the kind you see on a phone tower, but the light was not blinking any ordinary fashion, as it did not appear to follow any kind of pattern. I slowed down as I neared it, because something hovering over the church caught my eye. The blinking red light appeared to belong to a giant airship that was hovering 150 feet above the steeple of the church. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I won't pretend to be some kind of expert on helicopters or planes, but the airship followed no traditional guidelines that I had ever seen before. I can't remember precisely what it looked like, but I can say this. It was long and cylindrical shaped. There was no identifiable front or back. The red light I mentioned earlier was in the middle. It did not have wings of any kind or rotary blades. It had large vent-like protrusions that had white light coming out of them. It made no identifiable noise and was idly hovering over the church. At some point, it began drifting to the side like a balloon. The phone I had at the time was a crappy BlackBerry with a 2-megapixel camera. I tried to get to the back of my car to grab my DSLR camera, but the moment I put it in park and started to turn around, the ship began to move. In what seemed like half a second, it had shot off to the west and was gone in the blink of an eye. I still have no logical explanation for what I saw. A couple of weeks after I saw the thing, I had an extremely vivid dream in which creatures crawled in through my window and tried to take me out of my bed. They were muttering in a weird language that sounded like shrieking and clicks. I'm confident that it was only a nightmare, but it seemed significant to mention anyway. It was about 4 years ago. My cousin and I came out of the woods after deer hunting, about 45 minutes before dusk. My uncle was also coming out of the woods at the same time. We met at his truck and just stood around, talking for a while. My cousin saw it first. There were 2 sets of 5 lights, each hovering above the tree line, about half a mile away. One set would stay still, as the other would go down behind the trees. When it was at its lowest, you could hear a loud noise, one that I can't really describe to you. After the noise and the craft would return to the height of the other craft, it was just hovering. Craft 2 would then drop down and do the same thing. This went on for a good half an hour. All of us were just stunned by what we were seeing. The weirdest part was, above the crafts, high in the sky, about the level or higher than the planes fly, was a ring of lights, almost like planes circling at an airport. Eventually, the crafts just took off at an angle away from us and were gone, and the lights high in the sky were gone as well. We stopped talking about it because nobody simply believed us. This happened 7 years ago on the beach in Massachusetts. Me, my brother, and my cousin, and the girl I was with at the time were taking a night walk along the beach, as we often do, to see the stars. Having very little light pollution at the edge of the continent affords us a spectacular view, much more impressive than any we could find where we live. We had found a nice little spot, sheltered by rocks, to sit and soak up the sights, when my cousin and I spotted something off near the horizon. It was a bright light, nothing more, blinking on and off at regular intervals. My cousin and I debated what it was for a minute or two. I thought that it could have been a lighthouse because it was over land. The area we were on the bay side of the cape, which overlooks the entire inner ring of land. After surveying the surrounding lights from the building, etc., we concluded that it was far too high in the sky to be a lighthouse. The idea was that it was an airplane crossed our minds as well, yet it was stationary. There was no noise coming from it, although we may not have been able to hear it from several miles away. We didn't debate it for too long. It wasn't that interesting after all. There was nothing about it that said it wasn't something ordinary. So my cousin and I went back to chat with my brother and my girlfriend, who had been talking a few yards away. And now for the part I cannot explain. As we're in the middle of some of our regular banter, the 3 of them froze, jaws to the ground, looking behind me and up. At the same time, I noticed that my back had gotten instantly warmer. Turning to follow their stunned gaze, I looked up. Behind where I was standing, and nearly 100 feet in the air, hung a luminous orb, suspended silently in the air. People with lesser powers of observation could have merely described it as a light in the sky. Yet, I am here to tell you that this was infinitely more interesting than that. It was no ordinary light. I'm willing to bet that almost anybody old enough to know the difference is able to tell you what type of light is being emitted by any device or natural phenomenon. Even when not directly facing the light, most of us would be able to discern the difference between light cast by an incandescent bulb, lamp, or an LED laser, TV set, the sun, the moon, fire, you get the picture. This light had a quality that I have never seen before or since in this life. One more time, with emphasis. This light was like nothing I have ever witnessed on Earth before or since. It was incredibly bright, but it didn't hurt to look right at it, even though it was nighttime. It was bluish and gave off an energy that I could feel against my face, similar to the sun's rays. It looked liquid, almost alive, much like bioluminescence. Upon looking at it, any one of you reading this, no matter how skeptical, would have been stunned into silence. All four of us certainly were, and as we stood silent, this object was suspended above us and gawked. Finally, in my excitement and confusion, lifted a finger and pointed at this sphere of light, saying, "What is that?" at least half a dozen times. As on cue, this object did something even harder to describe. To put it simply would be saying that it faded out, but that would be ludicrous considering just how it achieved this act. It moved silently in a straight line towards us, above our heads, all the while fading out from existence. It wasn't so simple as merely fading out like a dimmer switch on the kitchen light. It wrapped the darkness of space around itself and moved and became a shadow where once it was light. Imagine taking a lit light bulb and dragging it across the surface of a pool of black paint, slowly submerging it all the while. That's the best way I can describe it. Did it phase out into another dimension? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. I'm just telling you what I saw. Once it had completely phased out, it did a loop and shot incredibly fast all the way back across the bay, where it continued to blink on and off at regular intervals. We sat and watched this for a while, now knowing for sure it was something extraordinary. Eventually, there were two. One would blink on, then the other one off. This spectacle went on all night. I fell asleep watching it out the window. They never came so close again, and in the years we went back to the beach, we never saw anything like it again. Every time I go back, I hope to pray to witness this again, promising myself that I will try and communicate instead of being completely flabbergasted. It was clear to me, and the rest of us present, but it was something that was under intelligent control. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough to fit one person at least. I leave it up to you to ask questions and theorize. It was an open forum, as I said. I cannot explain it without speculation and conjecture. I will say a few things that it was definitely not. It was not swamp gas. It was not a ball of lightning. It was not chain lightning. It was not a plane, a blimp, or a weather balloon, star, or a planet. It was something I have never seen before, and something I cannot explain.